Don't you ever talk to us again. That's right, don't talk to us. Just do the housework in silence. I was being harassed by my mother-in-law, Cable. My husband sided with Cable, and far from helping me, he joined in the harassment. Unable to bear their torment, I resisted slightly, only for them to switch tactics to ignoring me. Cable, it's your turn for the bath next. Nothing. Darling, how about next Sunday? Again, nothing. Days of being ignored by my husband and Cable at home began leaving me in mental anguish. However, as time passed, I started to feel a sense of relief in not interacting with them, considering it better than the harassment. Thus, I resigned myself to their disregard, remaining ignored for a whole decade. I didn't divorce simply because it was too much trouble. Divorce involves negotiations, lifestyle changes, and a change in how others perceive you. Too many hassles. I believe many couples like us don't divorce merely because it's inconvenient. One day, a significant incident shook our apathetic household. Why did you run away alone? We suffered terribly because of you. Our house caught fire from a candle igniting Cable's dress. Believing I'd be ignored anyway, I evacuated alone. Despite ignoring me for 10 years, my husband and Cable bitterly complained that I hadn't alerted them to the fire. I decided it was time to address the decade-long issue of being ignored by my husband and Cable. Perhaps this fire was the push I needed. I am a 48-year-old office worker, currently living with my husband, Jewel, and mother-in-law, Cable, in their family home. Our son, Mixon, now 24, has already moved out, and my father-in-law, Kettle, passed away 12 years ago. We started living with the in-laws about 15 years ago. Kettle fell ill, and as Cable was turning 60, my husband suggested we move in to provide support. Fortunately, the in-laws' house was close to our previous residence, so commuting and our son's schooling weren't affected. I preferred to keep things easy and maintain a familiar environment, but this was within my tolerance. We've received so much kindness from the in-laws, and I couldn't abandon them, so I agreed with my husband's suggestion. I'm sorry for burdening you with the care of an old man. What are you talking about? I don't find it a bother at all. Kettle was a typically dominant husband, strict with my husband and Cable. However, I knew his sternness towards them was out of love, wanting them to be more responsible. Kettle was always kind to me and our son, often talking about my husband and Cable. Cable is sloppy and has a habit of slacking off, so I have to keep a close eye on her. Really? Cable always does the housework for me when I'm tired from work. She seems very kind to me. That's because I'm keeping an eye on her, and Jewel is still too dependent, not ready to leave the nest, so he needs to be toughened up. He's doing very well at his job and is well regarded at work. I find Jewel to be very reliable. It seems my and Kettle's impressions of my husband and Cable are quite different. I found it a little strange how Kettle and I had such different views of them. Kettle passed away 3 years after we moved in due to illness. Kettle's death was a great loss. Mixon and I cried together, but my husband and Cable didn't seem as affected at the funeral. I thought they were being strong and composed, so I tried to regain my composure and act as normally as possible. However, Kettle was a central figure in our home, and his absence significantly impacted our family. Months after Kettle's death, gradual changes began to surface in our household. Hey, don't spend all day in bed just because it's the weekend. I'm sorry, I was late from work yesterday, but I'll get breakfast ready now. Don't use work as an excuse. Get up right now. After Kettle's death, Cable began to make me do more of the household chores she used to help with. What are you doing? Cable is hungry. My husband didn't support me, always siding with Cable and joining in the criticism. I thought their roughness was temporary due to Kettle's recent passing. I hoped they would return to their former selves if I just endured their harassment for a while. However, even after 2 years, their harassment didn't stop and, if anything, escalated. Hey, Cable, stop throwing away my things. What are you talking about? Stop making accusations. Why are you attacking Cable? Are you sure you're not mistaken? She started to dispose of my belongings, like clothes and accessories, under the guise of tidying up, often targeting my favorite items. Furthermore, she completely stopped doing any household chores, leaving them all to me. She must have a talent for harassment. And my husband? Not once did he take my side. Seeing Cable shirking her duties and my husband supporting her, I began to understand what Kettle meant about Cable's laziness and my husband's dependence. Kettle must have kept them in line with his strict oversight. But now, with Kettle gone and no one to keep them in check, their true nature seemed to emerge. The kind Cable and reliable husband I once knew were gone, now replaced by a pair who shirked household duties and harassed me. Cable and my husband tormented me together. If I so much as spoke up, they would shout or make snide remarks to suppress me. In a home now missing Kettle, I had become a lonely figure. I had thought they were being brave by not showing their sadness at Kettle's death, but seeing their current behavior, it seems they are finally showing the impact of his absence. Both of you, enough is enough. I can't stay in this house if it continues like this. Oh, scary, yelling like that. Just stop the violence. Okay, well, if you want a divorce, that's a different story. Having been intimidated by Cable's domineering nature, Cable and my husband had never spoken their minds fully. But with Cable gone, it seems they become unrestrained in voicing their thoughts, always nitpicking and enjoying my reactions. Moreover, my husband has begun to casually mention divorce. At that time, I was 38, and our son was still in middle school. Close to my 40s, I didn't want to become a divorcee, at least not until my son was grown, or so they must have mistakenly thought I believed, assuming I wouldn't opt for divorce. Indeed, divorce involves tedious negotiations, lifestyle changes, and altered perceptions due to being divorced. So naturally, I'd prefer to avoid it if possible. I suspect many couples avoid divorce simply because it's inconvenient, and the word divorce likely makes many recoil. So my husband probably uses it as a tactic to intimidate me. However, I'm 48 now, with a stable job and income, and I believe my son and I can manage well enough on our own. So while I'd prefer to avoid divorce, I'm not opposed to it. Is divorce okay with you? Then let's go for it. Huh? I casually mentioned willingness to divorce, seeing it as preferable to enduring ongoing harassment from Cable and my husband. My statement clearly startled them. Their panic made sense. If I divorced and took our son, it would leave just the two of them in the family home. Cable is still well, but it's likely she may weaken or fall ill as time goes on. Caring for Cable while working alone will be challenging for my husband, making divorce a more significant burden for them. It's thoughtless to speak of divorce so lightly without considering the future. Don't be so defiant. Besides, there's no solid reason for divorce, so it's not likely to happen. It's true I'm harassed but not physically abused, and I'm not suffering extreme mental anguish. So if my husband refuses, divorce might indeed be difficult. However, I find divorce troublesome and would rather avoid it if possible. So if my husband doesn't want a divorce, that's fine too. If I express a willingness to divorce, it may reduce their harassment as they'll want to avoid me actually going through with it. But it seems my slight resistance in this conversation didn't sit well with them, and they decided to change their tactics. Don't you ever talk to us again? That's right, don't talk to us. Just do the housework in silence. And so they began to completely ignore me around the house. Cable, your turn for the bath is next. Darling, about next Sunday? If they can't beat me verbally, they resort to ignoring me like children. I initially thought ignoring me was a petty tactic, but it turned out to be surprisingly effective. Despite the harassment from my husband and Cable, being ignored in my own home brought a strong sense of loneliness and mental strain. My son was a middle schooler in the throes of adolescence, not much for family conversation. The onset of a life filled with silence and hardship began as I had no one to talk to at home. The silent treatment from the two was mentally challenging, but after a while, I started to find a sense of ease in not interacting with them, considering it better than the harassment. Thus, I came to accept the situation, leaving the issue of being ignored unaddressed for a whole decade. If I could live comfortably without changing anything and without getting a divorce, it was almost a wish come true. However, feeling intense loneliness at home for 10 years was undoubtedly tough. Additionally, it was frustrating and inconvenient not being able to communicate with Cable and my husband, as they wouldn't respond to me. There was a period when I attempted to reconcile and spoke to them, but my efforts were met with consistent disregard, leaving me feeling worse. So eventually, I gave up on repairing the relationship. One day, a significant incident occurred in our distant household. It was Cable's 13th death anniversary, and relatives gathered at the family home. It wasn't a large event. For the 13th anniversary, a monk was simply invited to the family home to chant sutras. By midday, the gathered relatives had left. "Oh, I'm tired. Jewel, let's eat lunch first." "Sounds good. We can leave the cleaning for later." Did Cable really do anything tiring? After all, I was the one who contacted the relatives and prepared the tea and snacks for hospitality all on my own. And my husband's words, though not directed at me, implied that they wouldn't bother cleaning up, essentially leaving it to me in a roundabout way. "I'll take care of the cleaning up then." They spoke to me in front of the relatives, but as soon as they left, Cable and my husband immediately reverted to ignoring me. Since they weren't going to clean up, I headed to the back room to start tidying. Entering the back room, I found Cable's dress and my husband's suit carelessly discarded. Apparently, cleaning these up was also left to me. Upon closer inspection, I noticed the ashtray had toppled over, and Cable's dress was covered in ash. Probably the mess was caused during their hasty undressing or by the discarded clothes hitting something. What were they thinking, leaving things around that could start a fire? The ash-covered dress looked like a hassle to clean up, so I decided to put away the cushions first, and then clean up the teacups and snack dishes the relatives had used. At that time, I underestimated the heat of the cigarette ash, thinking it wouldn't ignite like a candle. I later learned that the burning end of a cigarette can reach over 1,292 degrees Fahrenheit, and even the ash right after burning is over 572 degrees Fahrenheit. The main cause of the fire was the burning cigarette end igniting the wooden flooring, which then spread to the dress, fueling the flames. Ah, fire! After finishing the dishes and returning to the back room, I found the flames had grown to the size of a bonfire. This kind of smoldering combustion, like with cigarettes, is a common cause of fires, often due to oversight. The back room was a traditional style, filled with flammable materials like wooden flooring and lightweight doors. I had heard that fires could spread rapidly, so I decided it was better to leave and call the fire department, rather than attempt to extinguish the flames myself. Though I made the decision not to fight the fire quickly, I was torn over whether to alert Cable and my husband. "The house is on fire! We need to get out quickly!" Even if I said that, they might not take me seriously or just ignore me, and while trying to convince them, the fire could spread. Was there a need to risk myself for two people who ignored me for 10 years? Maybe it was better to pretend I didn't see them in the house. They would probably notice the smoke or smell soon enough, and they might have heard me when I found the fire. Considering their past behavior and weighing my safety against convincing them, I chose my safety and evacuated the house alone. Once outside, I quickly called the fire department. "My house is on fire. The flames are larger than a bonfire now, burning the back room." I conveyed the situation and confirmed what I needed to know. My husband and Cable might still be inside. They might not have noticed the fire, leaving them behind. I informed the firefighters that there were still people in the house. Of course, I didn't mention that I had intentionally not alerted them, given the potential size of the fire and the dangers of re-entering. I was instructed to wait for the fire truck on site. Since I've been told to wait by the professionals, all I can do is wait. This way, even if Cable and my husband complain, I can excuse it as following the fire department's instructions. I expected them to notice the fire and exit the house quickly, so I wasn't overly concerned. However, as minutes passed and they didn't appear, smoke began to leak outside, and I started to worry. Eventually, Cable and my husband rushed out, coughing and struggling to breathe, likely from inhaling smoke. Had I gone too far? Feeling a twinge of guilt, I approached them. "Are you both okay? I've called the fire department." "Why are you the only one outside? You left us behind, didn't you?" They seemed too breathless to speak for long. A few minutes after they exited, the fire truck arrived, and Cable and my husband were taken to the hospital by ambulance. I chose not to go to the hospital but to stay and watch the house instead. The fire only damaged part of the back room. After the firefighters left, feeling mentally exhausted from the fire, I decided to visit the hospital the next day. I dreaded the impending nagging from the two, which would only depress me further. As I looked at the burned room, feeling like someone had tapped my shoulder, I braced for the complaints. Sure enough, when I visited the hospital a day after the fire, they bombarded me with every complaint they could muster. Why didn't you come to the hospital right away? I was also mentally distressed from the fire. Why did you escape alone? In a panic, I didn't know what to do, so I just rushed out and called the fire department. I was told by the firefighters not to go back in to rescue you two as it was too dangerous. Their voices were hoarse, probably from inhaling smoke, and they persisted with their complaints for nearly an hour. There were times when being ignored was hard, but the stress I feel from actually talking to them is even more intense. I can't bear it anymore. Enough. I can't take this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. In the heat of the moment, I raised my voice in the hospital, something I'm embarrassed about now. What? Divorcing now, after you left us in such a terrible state from escaping alone? That's right. And with the house repairs after the fire, it's going to be a tough time. Don't even think about divorce. If you do, you'll be facing many disadvantages. No, the disadvantages will be yours. You've ignored me for 10 years, making it difficult to continue the marriage. While there might not have been grounds for divorce a decade ago, their persistent neglect has now provided ample reason. Truly, they never thought ahead. I'll be consulting a lawyer, so please wait for contact. They continued to grumble, but I felt a sense of liberation, no longer hearing their complaints. I informed them I'd wait for the lawyer's advice and left the hospital room. I was surprised at myself for impulsively pushing for divorce, perhaps spurred by the mental exhaustion from the fire. I recall feeling as if someone had tapped my shoulder in the burned room, possibly kind Kettle signaling it was time to stop enduring and leave the in-laws' home. Maybe Kettle had somehow orchestrated the fire to create a situation where I could finally divorce. Invisible yet possibly my greatest ally, I felt a clearing of the mental fog and became more resolute about the divorce. I moved out of the in-laws' home, rented an apartment, and began the divorce proceedings. A week after leaving, my husband called. I consulted a lawyer but wasn't at the stage where my husband would have been informed. Curious, I answered the phone, only to have him pleading tearfully. Please, I beg you, don't leave me. Don't go through with the divorce. He tried to use fire insurance to repair the burned room, but apparently it was denied. The reason was unclear, but it seemed the cause of the fire was their negligence in leaving clothes strewn about, which led to the fire, a fault too great to be covered. Essentially, the insurance company denied their claim because the fire was their own fault. I agree with that assessment. Similar cases where fires caused by careless smoking or unattended stoves don't get covered by insurance are not uncommon. Repairing the entire room would cost a significant amount, and it seems Cable and my husband can't afford it. Indeed, it's impossible to live in a burned house. However, I've already communicated my intention to divorce and have separated, so I can't freely use marital funds. Though the divorce isn't final yet, using marital funds without consent could adversely affect the distribution of property later, putting my husband at a disadvantage. Moreover, with only my husband and Cable remaining at the in-laws' house, he will eventually have to care for Cable alone. He must know the difficulty of such care from his experience with Kettle, likely realizing he can't manage it alone. So, citing the repair cost for the burned room and Cable's future care, my husband pleaded with me, perhaps reflecting on his actions as a form of tough love from Kettle. Yet, there's no apology for the previous harsh treatment, only concern for their future well-being. It seems reconciliation is off the table. Respecting what might be Kettle's wishes, I decided to be the one to wield the stern whip in his stead. I'm divorcing, so I have no concern for the burned house, nor will I converse with someone who hasn't apologized for how they've treated me. I will apologize! I'll make Cable apologize too. Sorry for everything. Please come back. My husband passed the phone to Cable, who also apologized, but it felt insincere, as if they were bundling years of neglect into a single apology. Your apology has made it clear I can't return home. Why not? Please help us. Didn't I tell you before? Wait for the lawyer to contact you. As usual, please continue ignoring me. I answered the phone this time, but from now on, I will also be ignoring you too. I hung up on their continued apologies, immediately blocking their and the in-laws' home numbers. Subsequently, the decade of neglect served as grounds for divorce, and the proceedings moved forward smoothly. The thought of finally being free from 10 years of being ignored lightened my mood. Half a year later, the divorce was finalized, leaving my ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband at the in-laws' home. After my former mother-in-law and ex-husband pleaded with me over the phone, as they seem to have asked our 24-year-old son, who's only in his second year of work, for financial help and to persuade me. It's disappointing that parents would need to ask their young adult son for financial assistance. When my son was in middle school, that's when Cable and my husband began ignoring me. Being of an age where he could understand what was happening at home, he, however, rarely intervened in our relationship due to his adolescence. He did once question me during his college years. "Mom, is it really okay to continue like this with Dad and Grandma?" "I'm keeping it this way as a potential reason for an immediate divorce if necessary," I told him. As a college student capable of understanding and judging situations, I shared my true feelings with him. Naturally, as my ally, he kept my reasons for enduring the neglect a secret. "I'll try to avoid Dad and Grandma as much as possible from now on," he said. My son siding with me seemed to have rebuffed any consultations from my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law, distancing himself from them. Truly, they never thought ahead. Now, living in a burned house and estranged from me and our son, my ex-husband faces the future of caring for an elderly family member alone. As the sole provider, his income now becomes the mainstay of their living, a stark change from when our combined earnings supported the household. It's uncertain when he will be able to afford repairs for the house with his income alone. I can only imagine a bleak future for my ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband. Nevertheless, I hope they manage to live together, struggling yet united. Having divorced and now living alone, I'm free from the stress of dealing with them. My job provides a stable life. I'm enjoying my days, and I'm grateful to Kettle, who in a way might have been the one to push me toward this divorce.